In 1835, a survey team in what is now Kazakhstan entered a valley they were not supposed to find. The official report filed 3 months later described stone foundations measuring over 40 feet in height. But it was not the size of the foundations that disturbed the surveyors. It was what those foundations were designed to hold. Doorways that stood 18 feet tall. Staircases with steps measuring nearly 3 feet in height. And halls so vast that no ordinary human could have filled them. The survey was classified. The team was reassigned. The valley was removed from updated maps. No explanation was ever given. But the surveyors had written one word in their private notes before the documents were seized. Tartaria. This was not the first time that name had appeared in connection with structures built for giants. But by 1850, the name had begun to vanish. Maps were redrawn, borders were rewritten, and the cities that once stood across this empire disappeared as if they had never existed. The official explanation is that Tartaria was simply a vague term used by Europeans for unknown Asian territories. A cartographic placeholder. Nothing more. But they were its guardians. The beings who built the structures we cannot replicate. The beings who protected knowledge we have lost. And the beings who were erased in a process that began in 1835 and continues to this day. Consider what happened in that single year. In January 1835, the Kazakhstan survey team discovered the valley. In March, Russian military forces entered regions of Tartaria that had been previously inaccessible. In June, a series of unexplained earthquakes struck across Central Asia, destroying cities that had stood for centuries. In September, European cartographers received orders to update maps of the region. And by December, the first official reports began circulating that described Tartaria not as a nation, but as a geographic mistake. A misunderstanding, an error that needed correction. All of this happened in 1 year, and all of it pointed to a single conclusion. Tartaria was being erased, and the giants who had guarded it were being written out of existence. But before they could be erased, they had to be real, and the evidence shows they were. The structures that remain across the former territory of Tartaria tell a clear story. These were not built by ordinary humans. The scale is wrong. The engineering is wrong. The materials are wrong. In cities like Bokhara, Samarkand, and the ruins near the Aral Sea, doorways exceed 15 feet in height. Not as decoration, not as symbolism, but as functional architecture. The wear patterns on the threshold show use. The hinges, where they remain, are positioned for doors twice the height of a normal man. These were entrances designed for beings who stood far taller than us. And across Tartaria, these entrances appear in thousands of structures. The staircases present an even stronger case. In what is now Uzbekistan, there are ruins of a fortress where the steps measure between 28 and 32 inches in height. A normal human step is 6 to 8 inches. These steps would require a person of average height to climb as if scaling a wall. But for a being standing 12 to 15 feet tall, these steps would be proportional, comfortable, normal. The fortress was not built to keep people out. It was built to house those who defended the region, the guardians of Tartaria, the giants. And there is more. In the mountains east of the Caspian Sea, there are carved seats in stone amphitheaters that measure over 6 feet in width. Tables carved from single blocks of granite that stand 5 feet high. Door frames reinforced with iron bands designed to support weight far beyond what normal doors would require. These are not symbols. These are tools, furniture, infrastructure, built for a population that no longer exists. Or rather, a population that we are told never existed. But the physical evidence is only part of the story. Because Tartaria's giants were not just builders. They were guardians. And what they guarded was knowledge. Throughout the 18th century, travelers who passed through Tartaria reported something unusual. They described libraries, not small collections, but vast repositories carved into mountainsides. Halls filled with texts written in languages that European scholars could not translate. One French explorer, writing in 1770, described entering a structure near what is now the border of Kazakhstan and China. He wrote that the halls were lined with stone tablets inscribed with symbols he had never seen. The tablets were stored in compartments built into walls that reached over 20 feet high. He noted that ladders would be useless. The compartments could only be accessed by someone far taller. He wrote, "These halls were not made for men like us. They were made for those who came before." The Explorer's Journal was published in Paris in 1772. By 1780, it had been removed from circulation. Copies that survive today are kept in restricted archives. But the descriptions remain, and they match reports from other travelers who passed through Tartaria during the same period. Reports of structures designed to store knowledge. Reports of guardians who protected that knowledge. And reports of beings whose size made them unmistakable. One account, written by a Russian merchant in 1788, describes an encounter near the city of Khiva. The merchant wrote that he saw, from a distance, a group of figures moving near a stone tower. He estimated their height at between 12 and 14 feet. He wrote that they moved with purpose, that they carried objects he could not identify, and that when his caravan approached, the figures retreated into the structure. The merchant requested permission to enter. He was refused, not by the figures but by the local population who told him the tower was forbidden, that it belonged to the old guardians, and that those who entered without permission did not return. The merchant's account was dismissed as folklore, but it was not the only one. Similar descriptions appear in records from travelers, traders, and military surveyors throughout the late 1700s and early 1800s. All of them describe the same thing: beings of enormous size, structures built to their scale, and a population that feared and respected them in equal measure. These were not random giants wandering the wilderness. These were organized, purposeful. They had a role, and that role was to guard what Tartaria had built. But by 1835, something changed. The guardians began to disappear, and the knowledge they protected began to vanish with them. The earthquakes that struck Central Asia in 1835 were not ordinary seismic events. Survivors described them as unlike anything experienced before. The ground did not simply shake. It liquefied. Entire cities sank into the earth within hours. Lakes appeared where valleys had been. Mountains collapsed, burying structures that had stood for millennia. And in the aftermath, the survivors reported something disturbing. The destruction was not random. It followed a pattern. The cities that housed the largest structures, the ones with doorways built for giants, were hit the hardest. The libraries carved into mountains were buried under avalanches. The fortresses with oversized staircases were reduced to rubble. And the towers where the guardians had been seen were erased completely. This was not coincidence. This was targeted. And it happened simultaneously across a region spanning thousands of miles. As if something or someone had decided that Tartaria and its guardians needed to be removed. Not defeated, not conquered, but erased. Within months, military forces moved into the region. Not to provide aid, not to rebuild, but to secure the ruins. Survivors were relocated. Access to certain areas was restricted, and the structures that remained were either demolished or buried. European powers, particularly Russia and Britain, moved quickly to establish control over territories that had, until recently, been part of Tartaria. But they did not claim to be conquering Tartaria. They claimed to be discovering uninhabited land, mapping unknown regions, civilizing empty wilderness. The implication was clear. Tartaria had never existed, and if it had never existed, neither had its guardians. But the maps told a different story. Maps published before 1835 show Tartaria as a massive empire with defined borders, major cities, and trade routes connecting it to Europe, China, and the Middle East. These were not speculative maps. They were commercial documents used by traders and governments. Their accuracy was critical. Yet maps published after 1850 show the same geographic area divided into vague territories labeled as unexplored or tribal regions. The cities are gone. The borders are gone. The name Tartaria is gone, as if an entire nation had been wiped from memory in the span of 15 years. And the giants, the guardians of that nation, were erased with it. References to them in earlier texts were removed in later editions. Accounts that mentioned beings of unusual size were edited or dismissed as exaggeration. Physical evidence, including skeletal remains, was collected and then disappeared. And by the end of the 19th century, the official position was clear. Giants had never existed. Tartaria had never existed. And anyone who claimed otherwise was spreading folklore. But the folklore persisted, because the people who lived in those regions remembered. They passed down stories of the tall ones, the protectors, the guardians who had kept the old cities safe. Stories of beings who possessed knowledge that normal humans did not, who built structures that could not be replicated, and who vanished in a single catastrophic year. The year 1835, the year the earth itself seemed to turn against them, and the evidence, though suppressed, continued to surface. In 1868, a Russian engineer working near the site of the original 1835 survey discovered fragments of the same foundations described in the classified report. He measured doorways identical to those documented 30 years earlier. He photographed them. He submitted his findings to the Imperial Academy of Sciences. His report was filed under a restricted classification. The photographs were never published, and the site was buried under a government construction project in 1875. The engineer protested. He was reassigned to a remote outpost in Siberia. He did not speak publicly about his discovery again. In 1902, a British surveyor mapping territories near the Afghan border found ruins of a structure with staircases matching the dimensions seen across former Tartarian cities. He wrote that the stairs were clearly designed for beings far taller than any known population. He requested permission to excavate. Permission was denied. The site was declared off-limits. When the surveyor returned years later, the ruins had been demolished. The stone had been removed. The ground had been leveled. Nothing remained. This pattern repeated across the former territory of Tartaria. Sites were discovered. They were documented. And then they were destroyed. Not by time, not by neglect, but deliberately. And the reason becomes clear when we consider what those sites represented. They were proof. Proof that giants had existed. Proof that they had built a civilization far more advanced than the official timeline allowed. And proof that in 1835 something had destroyed them. But what could destroy beings of such size and power? What force could erase an entire civilization in a single year? The official explanation, when one is given at all, is natural disaster. Earthquakes, floods, unpredictable acts of nature. But natural disasters do not systematically target specific structures. They do not follow patterns. They do not strike simultaneously across thousands of miles with precision that destroys only the largest and most advanced buildings. And they do not coincide with military operations designed to secure and suppress evidence. The alternative explanation is far more disturbing. That the destruction of Tartaria and its guardians was not natural. That it was planned. That forces, whether human or otherwise, decided that the knowledge and power held by the giants posed a threat. And that the only solution was total erasure. Not just of the beings themselves, but of all evidence that they had ever existed. This idea seems impossible, but the evidence supports it. The timing supports it. The military response supports it. And the systematic suppression of information that followed supports it. If the destruction had been purely natural, there would be no need to classify surveys. No need to remove maps. No need to demolish ruins that could have been studied. But all of these things happened. And they happened in a coordinated manner that suggests intent. And the suppression did not end in the 19th century. Continues today. In 2004, construction workers in northern Kazakhstan uncovered foundations identical to those described in the 1835 survey. The same oversized doorways. The same massive stone blocks. The same evidence of construction far beyond the capabilities of known populations in that region. The discovery was reported in local media. Photographs were taken. But within a week, the site was closed. Military personnel arrived. The workers were relocated. And the foundations were buried under several feet of concrete as part of a new highway project. The photographs disappeared from news archives. The workers were told not to discuss what they had found. And the story vanished. This is not archaeology. This is erasure. And it is happening in real time. Because the truth about Tartaria and its guardians remains a threat. A threat to the narrative that human history is a simple story of linear progress. A threat to the belief that we are the most advanced civilization this planet has ever seen. And a threat to the institutions that derive their authority from controlling the accepted version of the past. But the truth is emerging, because too much evidence remains. Too many maps, too many photographs, too many accounts from credible sources, and too many structures that still stand, despite every effort to destroy them. Structures that whisper a story the official narrative cannot contain. A story of giants who built an empire, who guarded knowledge we have lost, and who were erased in a single catastrophic year. Not by accident, but by design. The guardians of Tartaria were real. The empire and the erasure that began in 1835 was real. What remains now is the question. If they were removed so completely, what were they protecting? What knowledge did they hold that was worth destroying an entire civilization to suppress? And if it happened to them, what does that mean for us? The answers are not in textbooks. They are buried beneath highways in Kazakhstan. They are locked in restricted archives in Moscow and London. They are hidden in private collections that are never displayed. And they are waiting in ruins that are still being discovered and still being destroyed. The story of Tartaria is not over. It is simply paused. Waiting for enough people to ask the right questions. Waiting for the moment when the suppression can no longer hold. Waiting for the truth to surface. Because the truth, no matter how deeply buried, does not disappear. It only waits. And when it emerges, it changes everything.